A 50-year-old mafia king marries a woman 30 years younger, not for love, but to keep her alive. On their wedding night, he doesn't touch her. He doesn't speak. He simply walks away, leaving her alone in a marble palace that feels more like a tomb. Elena Vieri thought she knew fear, but standing in that empty room, wearing white silk that felt like a funeral shroud, she realized something far worse. She had just married the man who destroyed her childhood, and he had been watching her for years. If you want to see how far this story of betrayal, blood, and impossible choices will go, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's story travels. The church smelled like old stone and dying flowers. Elena stood at the altar in a dress she hadn't chosen, beside a man she'd never spoken to, surrounded by people who wanted her dead. The priest's voice droned on in Latin she barely understood, words about unity and devotion that meant nothing here. This wasn't a wedding, it was a transaction, a signature on a contract written in someone else's blood. She kept her eyes forward, but her peripheral vision caught fragments. Men in dark suits lining the pews like sentries, hands resting too casually near concealed weapons. Women in expensive jewelry whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. And at the center of it all, the man beside her, Dominic Falcone, 50 years old, silver threading through his dark hair, a scar cutting a thin line along his jaw. He stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of him, expression carved from granite. He hadn't looked at her once. "Do you, Elena Margherita Vieri, take this man?" Her throat closed. The priest's voice faded beneath the rush of blood in her ears. She thought about running. The door was 20 feet away. She could kick off these ridiculous heels, gather the dress, sprint. But Marco Vieri, her uncle, sat in the front row, his gaze heavy on the back of her neck. He'd made the terms clear 3 days ago. You marry Falcone, or I sell you to the Calabrians. They won't be gentle about breaking you in. So here she was, 20 years old, a pawn on a board she'd never asked to play on. "I do," she whispered. The priest turned to Dominic. "And do you, Dominic Augusto Falcone?" "Yes." One word, flat, final, like signing a death warrant. The ring slid onto her finger, cold, heavy, too tight. She stared at it, this circle of gold that marked her as property. Dominic's hand withdrew immediately, no lingering touch, no performance of tenderness for the crowd. "You may kiss the bride." Silence stretched. Elena's heart hammered. She'd been preparing herself for this moment, steeling her spine, building walls. But Dominic simply turned to the priest, gave a single shake of his head, and stepped back. No kiss. The priest blinked, confused, but nodded quickly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause rippled through the church, polite and cold. Elena felt disconnected from her body, watching from somewhere far away as Dominic offered his arm. Not tender, just procedural, and she took it because she had to. They walked down the aisle together, strangers bound by law and violence. The car waiting outside was black, armor-plated, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see through them. Dominic held the door open. She climbed in. He followed, settling into the seat across from her, not beside her. The door closed, the engine purred to life, and they drove in silence through streets she'd known her whole life, now foreign and threatening. She watched the city pass, the narrow alleys of the old quarter, the piazzas where she'd played as a child, the cafe where her mother used to buy her almond pastries on Sunday mornings. That life felt like someone else's memory now. "You'll have your own room." Elena's head snapped toward Dominic, his first words to her. Not an introduction, not a greeting, just cold logistics. "The East Wing, 2nd floor," he continued, still looking out the window. "Separate bathroom. You won't be disturbed." She didn't know what to say. Relief and confusion tangled together. "They're guards," he added. "They're not there to watch you. They're there to keep you alive. Don't leave the grounds without my permission." Permission, like she was a child. "Why did you marry me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His gaze finally shifted to her. Gray eyes, cold and assessing. She'd seen warmer looks from statues. "Because your uncle would have killed you if I didn't." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." The car turned onto a private road, iron gates opening automatically as they approached. The estate sprawled before them, a villa that looked more like a fortress, all stone and sharp angles, lit by security lights that turned the gardens harsh and shadowless. Beautiful and dead at the same time. Inside, the air was cool, the silence absolute. Marble floors, high ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. It felt like a museum after closing, everything preserved and untouched. A woman appeared from a side hallway, older, maybe 60, gray hair pulled back severely, wearing a simple black dress. She looked Elena over with the efficiency of someone evaluating livestock. "This is Teresa," Dominic said. "She runs the house. If you need anything, ask her." Teresa nodded once. "I'll show you to your room." "Wait." Elena looked at Dominic. "That's it? You're just sending me off?" "Yes. We're married. On paper. So this whole thing," she gestured between them, "means nothing to you?" His expression didn't shift. "It means you're protected. That's enough." He turned and walked away, footsteps echoing down a corridor until a door closed somewhere distant. Teresa cleared her throat gently. "This way, Signora." Elena followed, because what else could she do? They climbed a wide staircase, turned down a hallway lined with closed doors, stopped in front of one near the end. Teresa pushed it open. The room was large, decorated in cream and gold, a four-poster bed dominating the space. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking dark gardens. Expensive and impersonal, like a luxury hotel. "Your things were brought over this afternoon," Teresa said, gesturing to a closet where Elena's meager belongings looked lost among empty hangers. "Bathroom through there. Kitchen is downstairs, but meals will be brought to you if you prefer." "Brought to me?" Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. "Like room service." Teresa's expression softened slightly. "It's not what you think. Then what is it? Safer than you being anywhere else." Before Elena could respond, Teresa left, closing the door with a soft click. The lock didn't engage, she could hear the absence of it, but somehow that felt worse. She wasn't locked in. She was just expected to stay. Elena walked to the balcony, pushed open the doors, stepped into night air that tasted like jasmine and decay. Below, the garden stretched into darkness. Beyond the walls, the city glittered, close enough to see, too far to reach. She touched the ring on her finger. Already it felt like part of her, this weight she'd carry forever. A sound made her turn. Nothing. Just the old house settling. She went back inside, closed the doors, and stood in the center of this beautiful, empty room. 20 years old, married to a stranger, protected, Dominic had said. But from what? And for how long? She didn't sleep that night. Just sat by the window, watching shadows move across the grounds, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake by not running when she had the chance. Morning came gray and cold. Elena dressed in her own clothes, jeans, a sweater, nothing bridal, and ventured downstairs. The house felt different in daylight, less threatening, but more lonely. She found the kitchen eventually, following the smell of coffee and bread. Teresa was there, chopping vegetables with quick, precise movements. She glanced up, nodded. "There's breakfast on the table." Fruit, pastries, coffee already poured. Elena sat, more out of habit than hunger. "Where is he?" "Signore Falcone left early. Business." "Business. Of course." Elena picked at a croissant, but her stomach was too tight to eat. She sipped coffee instead, bitter and strong. "Can I go outside?" Teresa paused mid-chop. "The gardens are yours. Beyond the walls, I wouldn't recommend it. I'm a prisoner here. You're alive here. There's a difference." Teresa set down her knife, wiped her hands on a towel, and sat across from Elena. Her eyes, dark and sharp, held something that might have been sympathy. "My daughter was your age when she died," Teresa said quietly. "Beautiful girl, smart. She thought she could leave this life, start fresh in Milano. She made it 3 weeks before they found her." She paused. "They sent her back to me in pieces." Elena's coffee cup shook in her hands. "Signore Falcone is not a good man," Teresa continued, "but he keeps his word. If he says you're protected, you're protected. Don't mistake that for affection. Don't expect love, but don't doubt it either." She stood, returned to her chopping. Elena sat in silence, processing. Then, why did she leave? Because she thought freedom was better than safety. Teresa didn't look up. She was wrong, but Days bled into each other. Elena explored the house when guards weren't watching, which was never, really, but she learned their patterns. Third floor, mostly offices and locked rooms. Second floor, bedrooms, including Dominic's at the far end of the west wing. She never saw him enter or leave it. First floor, public spaces, all cold elegance and unused furniture. Basement, she assumed, but the door was locked and no one offered a key. She walked the gardens, read books from the library, a massive room filled with leather-bound volumes in Italian, English, French. Most looked untouched. One shelf held newer paperbacks, mysteries and thrillers, pages worn from reading. She wondered whose they were. At night she heard sounds, doors opening and closing, low voices. Once shouting, then silence. She stayed in her room during those times, door closed, pretending not to hear. Dominic remained a ghost. She saw him twice in the first week, once across the garden, speaking with men in suits, his voice too low to catch. Once in the hallway, late at night, passing her room without stopping, without acknowledging her existence. On the 8th day, she broke. Elena marched down to his office. She'd figured out which one from watching the guards. And knocked. Hard. No response. She knocked again. What? Not a question, an irritated statement. She pushed the door open anyway. Dominic sat behind a massive desk covered in papers, laptop open, phone to his ear. He looked up, annoyance flickering across his face, and held up one finger. Wait. She waited. He finished his call, something about shipments and routes, nothing she understood, and set the phone down. Leaned back, studied her like she was an equation he couldn't solve. You need something. I need answers. No, you want answers. Different thing. Elena crossed her arms. Why did you marry me? I told you to protect me. Yes, but why? You don't know me. We've never met before the wedding, so why would you care if Marco killed me? Dominic's expression remained neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe, or memory. Your uncle owed me money, he said finally. A lot of money. He couldn't pay. Offered you instead. And you just accepted? I needed a wife. Why? That's not your concern. Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. I'm living in your house, wearing your ring, and it's not my concern? No. She wanted to scream. Instead, she stepped closer to the desk, planted her hands on it, leaned forward. You said your guards are keeping me alive. Alive from what? Who wants me dead? Dominic stood slowly, and Elena realized her mistake. He wasn't tall, maybe 6 feet, but he carried weight differently than other men, a density that made the room feel smaller. He came around the desk, stopped a few feet away, close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his gaze. A lot of people, he said quietly. Your uncle, for starters. He borrowed from me, offered you as collateral, then tried to take you back after we signed the contract. That makes you mine by law, which means taking you now would be theft. He won't risk that war. Anyone else? The Calabrians. They wanted you for other purposes. I outbid them. Elena's stomach turned. What purposes? Don't ask questions when you don't want the answers. Tell me anyway. Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then, they run brothels. High-end ones. Young women, especially ones with your background, sell well. The room tilted. Elena stepped back, hand going to her throat. You saved me from that, she said slowly, by marrying me. Yes. Why would you do that? I told you. No. She shook her head. Money doesn't explain this. Protection doesn't explain this. There's something else. Something you're not saying. His jaw tightened. For the first time, a crack appeared in his control. Get out! Tell me Get out! His voice didn't rise, but the menace in it froze her blood. She left, hurrying down the hallway, heart racing, hands shaking. Behind her, she heard the office door slam. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the conversation, turning his words over, looking for hidden meanings. I needed a wife. Why? Men like Dominic didn't marry out of social obligation. There was always an angle, always leverage. She got out of bed, pulled on a robe, and ventured into the hallway. The house was dark, quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. She moved carefully, avoiding the main corridors where guards would be stationed. The library drew her back. She didn't know why, just instinct maybe. She slipped inside, closed the door, turned on a small desk lamp. Shadows leaped across the walls. She started with the newer books, the ones that looked red. Nothing helpful. Then the older volumes, histories and biographies and legal texts. Still nothing. Then she found the bottom shelf, hidden behind a leather armchair. These books weren't displayed, they were stashed. Photo albums mostly, leather-bound and unlabeled. Elena pulled one out, opened it. The first page showed a much younger Dominic, maybe 30, standing beside a woman. She was beautiful, dark hair, bright smile, wearing a summer dress. They looked happy, almost normal. The next pages showed more of the same. The woman in a garden, at a restaurant, on a boat, always smiling, always alive. Then the photos stopped. The rest of the album was empty. Elena pulled out another album. Different woman, closer in age to Dominic in these photos. Wedding pictures. She wore white. He wore a suit. They kissed in front of a church, very different from the one where Elena had stood. More photos. This woman laughing, holding a baby, the baby growing into a small child, maybe 3 or 4, family pictures, domestic and warm. Then those photos stopped too. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the third album. She already knew what she'd find, but she had to see it. This one started differently. Surveillance photos. Grainy, distant, a woman walking down a street, sitting in a cafe, entering an apartment building. The same woman captured over and over, unaware of the camera. Elena turned the page and her breath caught. The woman was her mother. She recognized the pictures, knew them from her own memory. That cafe near the university, the apartment they'd lived in until Elena was 7, the street where they used to walk on Sunday afternoons. Someone had been watching her mother. Someone had been documenting her life. The photos continued, growing more frequent, closer shots. Then photos of Elena herself, young and oblivious, playing in a park, holding her mother's hand, laughing. The final photo made Elena's stomach drop. Her mother's apartment building. Night. Smoke pouring from a third-floor window. Fire trucks, police. And at the edge of the frame, barely visible in the shadows, a figure watching. She couldn't make out the face, but she knew. The door behind her opened. Elena spun around, album falling from her hands. Dominic stood in the doorway. He looked at the scattered photos, at her face, and something close to resignation crossed his expression. "You weren't supposed to find those," he said quietly. Elena's voice came out raw. "You were watching my mother." "Yes." "For how long?" "Years." "Why?" He stepped into the room, closed the door, leaned against it like he needed the support. "Because she was going to testify against my brother. And my brother wanted her dead." The room spun. Elena grabbed the chair to steady herself. "The fire," she whispered. "That killed her. That was not supposed to happen." Dominic's voice was flat, emotionless. "My brother acted without my knowledge. By the time I found out, it was too late." "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything. It's the truth." Elena's hands curled into fists. "Your family murdered my mother and you've been watching me ever since? For what? Guilt?" "Protection." "I don't want your protection." "Too bad. You have it anyway." She wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, wanted to grab one of those heavy books and smash it into his face until he felt a fraction of the pain tearing through her chest. Instead, she asked, "Where is he, your brother?" "Dead. I killed him 3 days after the fire." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. "You killed your own brother?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he crossed a line." Dominic's gray eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something human in them, something dark and furious and deeply, permanently broken. There are rules even in this life. Killing civilians, especially women and children, that's a rule. He broke it. So I ended him. Elena couldn't breathe. "And me? You married me because when Marco tried to sell you, I realized you were about to walk into the same hell your mother escaped. And I couldn't—" He stopped, jaw working. "I couldn't let that happen again. So this is about guilt. Call it what you want. I call it a prison. Elena's voice shook. You've trapped me here to ease your conscience. I've trapped you here to keep you alive. For what? So I can live out my life in this beautiful tomb, married to the man whose family destroyed mine? Dominic pushed off the door, crossed to her in 3 strides. She backed up, but he didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the gray in his hair, the scar on his jaw she'd wondered about. You want to leave? He said, voice low. Fine. Walk out that door. I won't stop you. But understand this. You'll be dead within a week. Maybe less. The Calabrians are patient, but not that patient. Your uncle is furious I took you. And there are others, people you don't know about, who see you as leverage against me now that we're married. Then divorce me. Doesn't work that way. Not in this world. Once you're marked as mine, you're always mine. That's the only thing keeping you safe. Elena laughed, bitter and broken. Safe? You call this safe? You're breathing, aren't you? Barely. They stood there deadlocked, fury and grief and something neither of them wanted to name crackling in the space between them. Finally, Dominic stepped back. I'll have the albums removed, he said, voice returning to that flat, controlled tone. You won't see them again. He turned toward the door. Wait. He paused, didn't look back. Did you love her? Elena asked. My mother? A long silence. Then, I never met her. I only knew her from the photos, from the reports. Then why protect me? Why go this far? He glanced over his shoulder. The light caught his face at an angle that made him look older, tired, almost human. Because someone should have protected her, he said, and no one did. Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Elena sank into the chair, surrounded by scattered photos of a life she'd lost, a mother she'd never gotten to mourn properly, and a truth that somehow made everything worse. She picked up one photo, her mother smiling, unaware of the camera, unaware of how little time she had left. And for the first time since the wedding, Elena cried. The next morning, the albums were gone. Elena searched the library, but every trace had been removed, like it never happened, like her discovery had been erased. But she remembered, and she couldn't unknow what she'd learned. She spent the day in her room, ignoring Teresa's gentle knocks, ignoring the meals left outside her door. She stared at the walls and tried to make sense of the impossible situation she'd been dropped into. Dominic had killed his own brother to avenge her mother. Dominic had been watching her for years, protecting her from a distance. Dominic had married her not out of desire or even strategy, but out of guilt and some twisted sense of responsibility. And now she was bound to him, legally and practically, with no escape that didn't end in her death. As night fell, Elena finally left her room. She needed air, needed space, needed anything that didn't feel like suffocation. The gardens were empty, lit by subtle pathway lights that made the hedges look like walls. She walked without direction, following stone paths that curved and doubled back, a maze designed to trap. She ended up at the far wall, where the property ended and the city began. She could hear traffic, distant voices, life continuing beyond these barriers. So close. Might as well be another country. You shouldn't be out here alone. Elena spun. A guard stood a few feet away, young, maybe 25, dark hair, tired eyes. She'd seen him around but never spoken to him. I'm on the grounds, she said. That's allowed. It's not about allowed. It's about safe. I'm so tired of that word. He smiled slightly. Yeah, I bet. They stood in silence for a moment. Elena studied him. He carried a gun, but his posture was relaxed, not threatening, more bodyguard than jailer. What's your name? She asked. Luca. How long have you worked for him? 5 years. And in those 5 years, has he ever done anything like this? Married someone to protect them? Luca's expression shifted, became careful. I can't talk about Signore Falcone's business. I'm his wife. That makes it my business. With respect, Signora, no it doesn't. Elena laughed, sharp. Of course not. Nothing does, apparently. Luca hesitated. Then, he's not a bad man. Not good either, but not bad. There's a difference. Is there? I've worked for worse, a lot worse. That's not exactly a glowing recommendation. It's the truth. Luca glanced toward the house, then back to her. Look, I don't know why he married you. No one does. But I know this. In 5 years, I've never seen him go this far to protect anyone outside the family. That means something. It means I'm a reminder of his guilt. Maybe. Or maybe it means he actually gives a shit. Luca shifted his weight. You should go back inside. It's late. It wasn't a suggestion. Elena nodded and started back toward the house. Halfway there, she turned. Luca? He looked up from his phone. Thank you for being honest. He nodded once. Don't expect it often, Signora. She went inside, climbed the stairs, locked herself in her room. But for the first time since the wedding, she felt something other than despair. Not hope. Not quite. But maybe the faint possibility that she wasn't completely alone in this. 3 more days passed. Elena established a routine. Mornings in the library, reading books she didn't care about. Afternoons in the gardens, walking until her feet hurt. Evenings in her room, watching the city lights and wondering what her life would have been if the fire had never happened. She saw Dominic twice, once through a window, talking on the phone and looking furious about something. Once in the hallway late at night when she'd ventured out for water and nearly collided with him coming out of his office. They'd frozen, staring at each other. Neither spoke. He'd stepped aside, let her pass, and disappeared into his room. She hated how her heart had raced in that moment, hated the confusion that tangled with her anger. On the 4th day, something changed. Elena woke to voices outside her door, urgent, hushed. She got out of bed, pressed her ear to the wood. Just got word, they're moving tonight. How many? At least 6, maybe more. Fuck, he's not gonna like this. Footsteps retreated quickly. Elena stood frozen, pulse hammering. Someone was coming. Someone was planning something. She dressed quickly, slipped into the hallway. Empty. The house felt different, tension humming through the walls like electricity before a storm. She found Dominic in his office, surrounded by men, all talking over each other in rapid Italian she struggled to follow. Maps spread across the desk, weapons laid out like surgical tools. Dominic looked up, saw her, and his expression darkened. Get her out of here, he snapped at Luca, who appeared at Elena's shoulder like magic. Come on, Signora. No. Elena pushed past him, into the room. The men stopped talking. What's happening? Nothing that concerns you. If people are coming for me, it concerns me. Dominic's jaw tightened. Who said anyone's coming for you? I heard your men talking. He cursed under his breath. Luca, take her upstairs. Lock her door. Don't let her out until I say. You can't just lock me up. Watch me. Luca's hand closed on her arm, gentle but firm. Elena tried to pull away, but he was stronger, already guiding her toward the door. Let go of me. I'm sorry, Signora. They were in the hallway now, Luca steering her toward the stairs. Behind them, the office door slammed shut. Luca, please. I have orders. He walked her to her room, waited while she went inside, then closed the door. She heard the lock engage from the outside. Elena pressed her forehead against the wood, hands clenched into fists, trapped. Again. She paced the room, anger and fear warring inside her chest. Minutes crawled by. An hour. She checked her phone. No signal, of course. The house had excellent cell-blocking technology. Then she heard it. Distant, but unmistakable. Gunfire. Elena ran to the window, threw open the balcony doors. Below, the gardens had transformed into chaos. Men running, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness. Shouts and screams and the flat crack of bullets hitting stone. Someone was attacking the house. She backed away from the window, heart in her throat. More gunfire, closer now, then an explosion that rattled the windows and made her ears ring. The door burst open. Luca stood there, blood on his shirt, gun drawn. We have to go, now. What's happening? No time. Come on. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the hallway. Smoke filled the air. The lights flickered. Somewhere below, glass shattered. They ran toward the back staircase, Luca half dragging her. Other guards appeared, fell into formation around them, creating a protective circle. Where's Dominic? Elena gasped. Handling it. Handling what? The Calabrians. They're trying to take you. Terror spiked through her. How did they get past the walls? Inside job. We had a traitor. They reached the ground floor. the back exit. Luca pushed the door open, checked outside, motioned them forward. The car waited in the driveway, engine running. They were 10 feet away when Elena heard it. A single gunshot. Luca went down, crumpling like his strings had been cut. Elena screamed. One of the guards shoved her forward, into the car, slamming the door. The driver floored it, tires screeching, and they were moving, racing down the driveway toward the gates. Elena twisted around, looking back. The house burned in places, smoke rising black against the night sky. Guards fought in the gardens, and on the front steps, barely visible in the chaos. Dominic, standing still, gun raised, firing with cold precision at shadows Elena couldn't see. Then the gates closed behind them, and he was gone. The driver took turns too fast, throwing Elena against the door. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Luca's face kept flashing in her mind. The way he'd looked at her in that last second, resigned and sorry. "Where are we going?" she managed. The guard in the passenger seat glanced back. "Safe house. Signore Falcone's orders." "Is he?" "He'll be fine. He always is." Elena didn't believe him. How could anyone be fine in that hell? They drove for 20 minutes, weaving through back streets, doubling back, checking for tails. Finally, they pulled into an underground garage beneath an anonymous apartment building. The guard opened her door. "6th floor. Apartment 604. Stay inside. Don't answer the door for anyone but me or Signore Falcone." "How will I know it's you?" He pulled out his phone, showed her a number. "Memorize this. If someone knocks and doesn't call this number first, don't open the door." Elena memorized the digits, her mind struggling to function through the shock. They took her upstairs. The apartment was small, clean, impersonal. One bedroom, basic furniture, no personal touches. A place designed for hiding. "Food in the fridge, don't leave. I'll be back in a few hours." Then they were gone, leaving her alone in this new cage. Elena sank onto the couch, shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hollow and terrified. She kept seeing Luca fall, kept hearing that gunshot, kept wondering if Dominic was alive or dead and hating herself for caring. Hours passed, no word, no updates, just silence and the distant sounds of the city beyond the windows. Dawn broke gray and cold. Elena stood at the window, watching people go about their normal lives below. Walking dogs, heading to work, buying coffee, oblivious to the violence that had shattered her world again. A phone rang. Not hers. A cell sitting on the kitchen counter, one she hadn't noticed before. She picked it up, answered. "Elena?" Dominic's voice. Rough, exhausted, but alive. Relief hit her so hard she had to sit down. "You're okay," she breathed. "More or less. You?" "I'm fine. They got me out." "Good." Silence stretched. She heard him breathing on the other end, heard pain in the sharpness of his inhale. "You're hurt," she said. "Flesh wound. I'll survive." Luca didn't. A pause, then quietly, "I know." "How many others?" 4 guards, the traitor, and 6 of theirs. Could have been worse. Elena closed her eyes. "This is my fault." "No, it's mine. I should have seen it coming." "What happens now?" "You stay there until I handle the rest. Should be a day, maybe 2. And then?" "Then we figure out what comes next." More silence. Elena wanted to ask 100 questions, but exhaustion and fear made them tangle in her throat. "Elena," Dominic said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry for all of this. You didn't ask for this life. No one asks for the lives they get. Some of us deserve them more than others." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Elena set the phone down, pulled her knees to her chest, and waited for the world to stop spinning. She'd been married for 2 weeks. She'd watched a man die protecting her. She'd discovered her husband had been watching her for years out of guilt over her mother's murder. And now she was hiding in a safe house, waiting for a man she barely knew to decide her fate. The ring on her finger felt heavier than ever. Outside, the city woke up. Inside, Elena sat in the silence and realized something that terrified her more than the attack, more than the guns and fire and blood. She didn't want Dominic to die. Not because he was her protection, but because somewhere in this nightmare, despite everything, she'd started to see him as human, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Dominic came for her 36 hours later. Elena heard the knock first. 3 quick raps, then a pause, then 2 more. The pattern they'd agreed on. She checked her phone anyway, saw the number flash on the screen, and only then unlocked the door. He looked like hell. Pale beneath his olive skin, dark circles under his eyes, left arm held stiff against his ribs. Blood had soaked through the bandage on his shoulder, leaving a dark stain on his shirt. "You should be in a hospital," Elena said. "Can't. Too many questions." He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "We need to move. They know about this place now." "How?" "The traitor talked before he died. Not much, but enough." Elena grabbed her jacket. She'd been wearing the same clothes for 2 days, smelling of smoke and fear. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they won't look." That was all he'd give her. They took the back stairs, emerged in an alley where a different car waited. Dominic drove this time, one-handed, his jaw tight with pain every time he shifted gears. They headed south, out of the city, into countryside that grew wilder and emptier as miles passed. Elena watched him from the corner of her eye. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool air. "You're going to pass out," she said finally. "I'm fine. You're bleeding through your bandage. It's under control." "Dominic," I said, "I'm fine." But 10 minutes later, he pulled over onto a dirt road, killed the engine, and sat there breathing hard. His hand shook when he reached for the door handle. Elena got out, came around to his side. "Let me drive." "You don't know where we're going. So tell me." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the calculation happening behind those gray eyes. Trust or control. Finally, he nodded. They switched places. He gave her directions in short, clipped sentences. Turn here, straight for 5 kilometers, left at the stone marker. The landscape changed from farmland to forest, the road narrowing to little more than a track. "There," Dominic said, pointing. A house appeared through the trees. Small, old stone walls and a slate roof. Windows shuttered, garden overgrown. It looked abandoned. "What is this place?" "My grandfather's. No one's used it in 20 years. It's not in any records connected to me." He fumbled with his seatbelt, grimacing. "Park around back." She did. The house had a small courtyard, cracked pavement, sprouting weeds. Dominic got out slowly, each movement deliberate and pained. Elena grabbed their bag. He'd brought supplies, she noticed, packed in a hurry, and followed him to the door. He produced a key from somewhere, unlocked it. Inside smelled like dust and time, but it was dry and relatively clean. Someone had been here recently enough to keep the worst of the decay at bay. "There's a generator in the shed," Dominic said, leaning against the doorframe. "Fuel should still be good. Kitchen works. Well water, so don't drink it straight. Boil it first." "How long are we staying?" "As long as it takes." "That's not an answer." "It's all I have right now." He moved past her, heading toward what looked like a bedroom. Made it 3 steps before his legs buckled. Elena caught him. Barely. He was heavier than he looked, all that dense muscle and bone, and she staggered under his weight. "Okay," she said, hooking his good arm over her shoulders. "We're doing this my way now." "Doing what?" "Keeping you alive." She half carried him to the bedroom, got him sitting on the edge of an old bed. Dust rose from the mattress. She set down the bag, dug through it. Medical supplies, thank God. He'd packed gauze, antiseptic, painkillers, antibiotics. "Take off your shirt," she said. "Elena, either you let me look at that wound or you bleed out. Your choice." He stared at her, then started unbuttoning. His hands fumbled, unsteady. She had to help with the last few buttons, trying not to notice the way his skin was too warm, too pale. The shirt came off in pieces, stuck to the bandage beneath. The wound was worse than she'd expected. A bullet had torn through his shoulder, front to back, and whoever had patched him up had done a rushed job. The stitches were uneven, some already pulling loose. Blood seeped from the edges. "Who did this?" Elena asked quietly. "Marco. My medic. He died in the attack." "I'm sorry." He knew the risks. She cleaned her hands with the antiseptic, then carefully peeled away the old bandage. Dominic's breathing went shallow, but he didn't make a sound. The entry wound was inflamed, hot to the touch. The exit wound on his back looked slightly better, but not by much. "This needs real medical attention," Elena said. "Make do with what we have." She wanted to argue, but what good would it do? They were hiding in a forgotten house in the middle of nowhere. No hospital would take them without reporting it. This was all they had. So she worked. Cleaned the wounds with antiseptic that made Dominic's hands clench into fists. Applied antibiotic ointment. Wrapped fresh gauze with hands that were steadier than she felt. The whole time she was intensely aware of his eyes on her, watching, assessing. "Where did you learn this?" he asked quietly. "My mother. She was a nurse before everything." "I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know about her, about me." Elena secured the last of the bandage, sat back. "There. That's the best I can do." "It's good. Thank you." She handed him antibiotics and painkillers, watched him swallow them dry. Then she helped him lie back, got him settled against pillows that smelled like mothballs. "Get some rest," she said. "What about you?" "Someone needs to stay awake. Make sure you don't die in your sleep." Elena shut. "I'm not arguing about this." His eyes were already closing, the painkillers and blood loss dragging him under. His breathing evened out, and within minutes he was asleep. Elena sat in a chair by the window, watching the forest beyond and listening to Dominic breathe. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. 2 days ago, she'd been trapped in a villa, angry and confused. Now she was hiding in the wilderness, playing nurse to a man who'd taken a bullet protecting his empire. Protecting her. She kept coming back to that. The attack had been about her. The Calabrians wanted her, would keep trying until they succeeded, or until every last one of them was dead. And Dominic, who owed her nothing, who'd married her out of guilt, he was willing to die keeping her safe. She didn't understand it, didn't understand him, but she was starting to realize that maybe she wanted to. The sun set. Elena found candles, lit them when the darkness grew too complete. The generator could wait until morning. For now, the quiet felt safer than the noise. She must have dozed off, because suddenly it was deep night and Dominic was calling her name. "Elena." She jerked awake, heart racing. He was sitting up, or trying to, one hand pressed to his shoulder. "What's wrong?" "Fever." His voice was rough, distant. "Need water." She found bottles in the bag, helped him drink. His skin burned under her touch. The wound was infected. She'd known it would be, but had hoped the antibiotics would kick in faster. "Lie down," she said. "I'll get cold water. Try to bring the fever down." "Stay." The word stopped her. She looked at him, saw him staring at nothing, eyes glassy. "I'm not going anywhere," she said gently. "They burned it down. The building. I told him not to. Told him she was just a witness, not a target. But he did it anyway." Elena's breath caught. "Dominic, she died. Your mother died. And I couldn't stop it. Couldn't fix it. Just like I couldn't fix Rosa, couldn't save Anna, couldn't protect—" He broke off, pressing the heel of his hand to his forehead. "Everyone I touch dies. That's the fever talking. It's the truth talking." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something raw and broken in his expression. "You should run, while you can, before I get you killed too." "I'm not running." "Why not?" "Because I'm tired of running." She meant it. Somewhere in the chaos of the last 2 days, she'd crossed a line she hadn't known existed. Fear had transmuted into something else. Not courage exactly, but a kind of exhausted defiance. She was tired of being a victim. Tired of being moved around like a chess piece. If she was going to survive this life, she needed to stop running from it. Dominic's eyes closed again. "You're crazy." "Probably." She spent the night bringing him water, changing the cold compress on his forehead, monitoring his breathing. The fever climbed, peaked around dawn, then finally broke as the sun rose. He fell into deeper sleep, the tension leaving his body. Elena stumbled to the kitchen, found coffee grounds that were probably stale, but she didn't care, boiled water on a camp stove, made something that resembled coffee, drank it black and bitter while standing at the window, watching morning light filter through the trees. Her phone had no signal out here. The world beyond this forest might as well not exist. For the first time since the wedding, she felt something close to peace. Temporary, fragile, but real. Dominic slept through the day. Elena explored the house, found it had been maintained just enough to be livable. No rot, no leaks, just time and dust. 3 small bedrooms, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, a bathroom with a rust-stained tub. Everything old, everything functional. She found photo albums in a closet, different ones than the library. These showed Dominic as a child, scrawny kid with serious eyes standing beside an old man who must have been his grandfather. Other photos showed teenagers, young men, women Elena didn't recognize. The weight of history pressed from every page. One photo stopped her. A young woman, maybe 20, holding a baby. She had Dominic's eyes, that same gray intensity. Written on the back, Rosa and Matteo, 1992. Rosa. He'd said that name last night in his fever. Elena kept looking, found more photos of Rosa, always with the baby. Then photos of just the baby, growing into a toddler. Then nothing. The album ended abruptly, like someone had torn out the rest. She closed it, put it back. Some secrets weren't hers to uncover. When she returned to the bedroom, Dominic was awake, staring at the ceiling. "How do you feel?" Elena asked. "Like I got shot." "That's accurate." She checked his forehead. Cooler, finally. "Fever broke. You should eat something." "Not hungry." "Don't care. You need food to heal." She went to make something simple, bread and cheese from the supplies, canned soup heated over the camp stove. When she brought it back, Dominic had managed to sit up, though the effort had left him pale. "You're stubborn," he said, taking the plate. "So are you." They ate in silence. Elena perched on the edge of the bed, Dominic propped against the headboard. The domesticity of it felt surreal. 2 weeks ago, they'd been strangers forced together. Now here they were, hiding in the wilderness, and somehow it felt more real than anything in the villa. "Rosa was my sister," Dominic said suddenly. Elena looked up. "She died when I was 19. Overdose. She was always fragile, even as a kid. My father pushed her too hard, expected too much. She couldn't handle it." He set down the barely touched soup. "The baby was my nephew, Matteo. He went to my aunt after Rosa died. I haven't seen him in 30 years. Don't even know if he's alive." "I'm sorry." "Why? You didn't kill her." "No, but loss is loss." Dominic studied her. "You really believe that?" "My mother died when I was 7. I spent the next 13 years being shuffled between relatives who didn't want me, until Marco finally took me in. Not out of kindness, he just wanted someone to cook and clean." Elena met his gaze. "So yeah, I believe it. Loss is loss. Doesn't matter who caused it. And yet you're sitting here taking care of me, the man whose family murdered your mother. Your brother murdered my mother. You killed him for it. That doesn't balance the scales." "No, but it's something." They looked at each other across the small space, and Elena felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them. Guilt and anger, and something else, something neither of them wanted to name. "You should rest more," Elena said finally, standing. "I'll check the wound later." "Elena?" She paused at the door. "Thank you. For staying. For helping." "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. We're in this together now, whether we like it or not." She left before he could respond. The afternoon crawled by. Elena tried to read from the few books scattered around the house, but concentration was impossible. Her mind kept circling back to Dominic, to the fever confessions, to the way he'd looked at her with something that might have been hope. She was in dangerous territory now, starting to humanize him, starting to see past the monster to the broken man beneath. That way led to complications she couldn't afford, but she couldn't unknow what she'd learned, couldn't unhear the pain in his voice when he talked about his sister, couldn't forget the way he'd protected her during the attack, taking a bullet that could easily have killed him. Maybe that was the point. Maybe she wasn't supposed to forget. Maybe this was how he kept people close, showed them just enough humanity to make them stay. Or maybe he was just as lost as she was, trapped in a life he'd never really chosen, trying to survive the only way he knew how. Evening came. Elena made dinner, more canned goods, bread going stale. She brought Dominic his portion, found him trying to stand on his own. "What are you doing?" "I need to move, can't stay in bed forever." "You were shot 2 days ago." "I'm aware. She set down the food, went to help him. He leaned on her more than he probably wanted to admit, and together they made it to the chair by the window. He sat heavily, breathing hard. "Better?" Elena asked. "Marginally." She handed him the food, watched him eat. He managed more this time, color slowly returning to his face. "How long do we stay here?" Elena asked. "Until I know it's safe. And if it's never safe, then we figure something else out." "That's not a plan. It's all I have." Elena sat on the edge of the bed, studying him in the fading light. "Who were the other women? In the photos?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "Anna was my wife. She died in childbirth 20 years ago. The baby died too." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I wasn't good to her. Wasn't there when she needed me. Too busy building the empire, making money, earning respect." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "She begged me to get out, to leave this life. I told her she was naive, that we needed the power, the protection. 2 months later, she was dead." "Dominic, I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand who I am, what I am. I destroy everything I touch. Rosa, Anna, Marco, Luca. Your mother, even if I didn't pull the trigger myself." He looked at her directly. "You need to understand that before you start feeling anything resembling trust. I don't trust you." "Good. Keep it that way." But even as he said it, Elena knew it was too late. Trust had already started creeping in, against all logic, against all sense. Because trust wasn't built on safety or reliability. It was built on truth. And Dominic, for all his violence and control, had been more honest with her than anyone in years. They sat in silence as darkness fell completely. Elena lit candles again, their light painting shadows across Dominic's face. He looked older like this, worn down by years of violence and guilt. "Tell me about her," Elena said quietly. "My mother." "I never met her." "But you watched her. You have photos going back years. Tell me what you saw." Dominic was quiet for a long time. Then, "She was careful, methodical. She never took the same route twice, always checked behind her, kept her routines irregular. Smart woman." "She was terrified." "She had reason to be. She'd witnessed something she shouldn't have, involving my brother's operation. He wanted her dead. She went into hiding, changed her name, moved constantly. But he was patient. Took him 3 years to find her. 3 years of running, and it still wasn't enough." "No." Elena stared at the candle flame, watching it flicker. "She used to tell me we were on an adventure. Every time we moved, every time we changed names, she made it into a game. I didn't understand why until after she died." "How did you end up with Marco?" "He was my father's brother. I barely knew him. But he was the only family left, so social services sent me to him. He tolerated me until I was old enough to work. Then I became useful. And when you stopped being useful, he sold me to you." The words hung in the air, ugly and true. "I'm sorry," Dominic said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Don't be. If he hadn't, I'd probably be dead by now. Or worse. There are worse things than death in this world." "I know. I've seen some of them." They looked at each other across the candlelit room, two people bound by violence and circumstance, neither quite sure how to navigate what they were becoming to each other. "You should sleep," Dominic said finally. "I'll stay up for a while." "Your fever just broke. You need rest more than I do." "Elena, we can trade off. You sleep now, I'll sleep later. You're not taking orders well." "I never did." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I'm starting to notice." She helped him back to bed, checked his bandages, made sure he took more antibiotics. Then she settled into the chair, wrapped in a blanket against the chill, and kept watch while he slept. The forest was quiet around them, just wind through trees and the occasional animal sound. Elena felt the weight of isolation pressing in, but it wasn't frightening. It was almost peaceful. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, she wasn't waiting for the next catastrophe. She was just here, in this moment, keeping watch over a man who was equal parts monster and human. And she was okay with that. Morning came again. Elena woke to find Dominic already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with coffee she hadn't made. "You're up," she said, surprised. "Feeling better. Fever's gone, pain's manageable." He gestured to a mug. "Made you coffee. It's terrible, but it's hot." She took it, sat across from him. He looked different in daylight, less intimidating somehow. Just a man in a borrowed house, drinking bad coffee, shoulder bandaged and face still too pale. "We need to talk about what comes next," Dominic said. "I thought we were staying here until it's safe." "It's never going to be safe." "Not really. The Calabrians won't stop. They've invested too much, lost too many men. This is personal now." "So what do you suggest?" "I end it. Go after them directly, cut off the head of the snake." Elena's stomach dropped. "That's suicide." "It's strategy. It's the same thing in this case." "Maybe, but it's the only way you'll ever be free." She stared at him. "You mean it." "I always mean what I say. You'd die for me. A woman you barely know. A woman you married out of guilt." "Yes." "Why?" Dominic set down his mug. "Because I'm tired. Tired of the violence, tired of the guilt, tired of watching people die for this empire I built. If I'm going to die anyway, and I am eventually, I'd rather it mean something." "And I'm that something?" "You're the first thing in 20 years that's felt like it might be worth saving." The honesty of it hit her like a punch. Elena looked away, blinking hard against tears she hadn't expected. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "To put that on me." "I know, but it's the truth." They sat in silence, the weight of his confession settling between them like smoke. "What if we ran?" Elena asked finally. "Just disappeared. Left this life behind. They'd find us. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Then we keep running. For how long? 5 years? 10? Always looking over our shoulders, never settling anywhere, never having a life beyond survival?" He shook his head. "That's not living. That's just slower dying. And going after the Calabrians is faster dying. At least it ends." Elena wanted to scream at him, shake him, make him see how insane this was. But looking at his face, she saw he'd already made his choice. This was how he wanted it to end, on his terms, with meaning, trying to fix one of the 1,000 things he'd broken. "When?" she asked. "Soon. I need a few more days to heal, then I go back." "Not alone." "Elena, if you're doing this, I'm coming with you. Don't argue. You won't win." They stared at each other, deadlocked. "You're as stubborn as your mother," Dominic said finally. "I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. The moment stretched, charged with something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Then Dominic stood, grimacing slightly, and held out his hand. "Come on, if we're doing this together, you need to know how to shoot." Over the next 3 days, Elena learned, Dominic taught her with the patience of someone who'd trained countless soldiers, showing her how to hold the gun, how to breathe, how to aim. They practiced in the woods behind the house, the crack of gunfire echoing through empty space. She was terrible at first, flinching every time she pulled the trigger. But Dominic was persistent, correcting her stance, her grip, her breathing. And slowly, she improved. "You're thinking too much," he said on the 3rd day, standing behind her, his good hand adjusting her elbow. "Don't aim with your eyes, aim with your gut. That makes no sense." "Try it anyway." She did. Stopped thinking, stopped calculating, just raised the gun and fired. The bottle 20 feet away exploded. "See?" Dominic said quietly, his voice close to her ear. "You know how. You just have to trust yourself." Elena turned, found him closer than she'd realized. Close enough to see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the new lines the last few days had etched around his mouth. "I don't trust easily," she said. "I know, neither do I." "So what are we doing?" "I don't know." But he didn't step back, and neither did she. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the smell of gunpowder and pine surrounding them, and Elena felt something shift. This wasn't the villa. This wasn't obligation or survival or guilt. This was something else entirely, and it terrified her more than any of the violence had. The moment broke when Dominic's phone rang. He stepped back, pulled the device from his pocket, frowned at the screen. "I need to take this." He walked toward the house, leaving Elena standing alone with the gun still warm in her hands. She watched him go, watched the tension return to his shoulders, the careful control reasserting itself. Whatever had almost happened between them was sealed away again, locked behind walls she was only beginning to understand existed. She set down the gun, gathered the empty shells scattered in the grass. Her hands were steadier than they should be. 3 days ago, she'd never held a weapon. Now it felt natural, an extension of her body. She didn't know if that made her safer or just more dangerous. When she returned to the house, Dominic was in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian. His expression was hard, closed off. He saw her, held up a finger, kept talking. Elena busied herself putting away the guns, checking the ammunition. When she looked up again, he'd ended the call and was staring at the wall like it held answers. "What happened?" she asked. "They found the villa's security footage. The attack, all of it. Someone leaked it to the press." "The press?" "Local news ran it this morning. Now it's everywhere. Video of armed men storming my property, the firefight, the bodies." He ran a hand through his hair, and she saw how his fingers trembled slightly. "The police are involved now. They're calling it a gang war, asking questions." "Can they trace it back to you?" "They already have. I'm officially a person of interest in a dozen murders, arson, weapons charges." His laugh was bitter, empty. 25 years I've kept the police in my pocket, and it falls apart in 48 hours. Elena sat at the table, processing. "What does this mean for us?" "It means hiding isn't enough anymore. The Calabrians will use the media attention, push for my arrest, make me toxic to everyone who's ever worked with me." He looked at her directly. "They're trying to isolate me before they make their final move. Then we move first." "We're not ready. When will we be? Another week? Another month?" Elena stood, crossed to him. "You said yourself we're running out of time. If they're closing in, we have to act now." Dominic studied her face, searching for something. Fear, maybe. Hesitation. He wouldn't find it. Whatever terror Elena had started with had burned away in the last 3 days, replaced by something colder, harder. "You've changed," he said quietly. "You needed me to. I didn't want this for you. Too late. I'm already here." They held each other's gaze, and Elena saw the exact moment he made his decision, saw the resignation, the grim acceptance of what came next. "All right," he said. "We go tonight. There's a warehouse where the Calabrians do most of their distribution. Small crew, 3 or 4 guards. We hit them there, send a message." "What kind of message?" "The kind written in blood." Elena should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the casual way he talked about violence. But standing in that kitchen, knowing what was coming for them, if they did nothing, she just nodded. "Tell me what to do." They spent the afternoon preparing. Dominic laid out weapons on the table, guns, knives, ammunition. He showed her how to load the magazines, how to clear a jam, how to check if a weapon was hot. Elena absorbed it all, her mind filing away information with mechanical precision. "Stay behind me," Dominic said, checking his own gun. "If shooting starts, find cover and don't come out until I say. You're backup, not frontline. And if something happens to you, then you run. Get to the car, drive north, don't stop until you hit the border." "I'm not leaving you." "Elena, we're doing this together or not at all." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Maybe because he knew it was pointless. Maybe because some part of him didn't want to die alone. They left as the sun was setting, taking back roads, avoiding cameras. The warehouse was an hour away, nestled in an industrial area that looked abandoned. Dominic parked 3 blocks out, killed the engine. "Last chance to back out," he said. I'm not backing out." "You might have to kill someone tonight." "I know. Have you ever killed anyone?" "No, but I've imagined it." Elena looked at him. "Every day since my mother died, I've imagined what I'd do to the person responsible, how I'd make them hurt the way she must have hurt. And now that you know it was my brother? Your brother's already dead, but the men in that warehouse? They're part of the same machine that killed her, that tried to kill me. So yeah, I can do this." Dominic searched her face, and whatever he saw there must have satisfied him. He nodded once, checked his weapons one last time. "Stay close, stay quiet. Don't shoot unless I do." They moved through the darkness like ghosts. Elena's heart hammered, but her hands were steady, the gun heavy and cold against her palm. Dominic led the way, each step careful and deliberate, years of experience guiding him through the shadows. The warehouse loomed ahead, lit by a single bulb over a side entrance. Dominic held up a fist, and Elena stopped. He gestured to a stack of crates. "Cover." And she moved to them, crouching low. He approached the door alone, tried the handle. Locked. He pulled out something small, worked at the mechanism for 30 seconds, and the door clicked open. They slipped inside. The interior was vast and dark, filled with rows of shipping containers and pallets stacked high with unmarked boxes. Somewhere in the distance, voices echoed. Dominic pointed left, mouthing the word 3. 3 men. Maybe more. They moved deeper into the warehouse, using the containers for cover. The voices grew louder, clearer. Italian mixed with something else. Maybe Greek. Laughter. The casual sound of men who didn't know death was coming. Dominic stopped at the edge of a container, peered around. Elena risked a look over his shoulder. 4 men sat around a card table, playing poker with money piled in the center. Guns lay within easy reach, but their attention was on their cards, on their game. They looked relaxed. Bored, even. Dominic's hand tightened on his gun. Elena saw the calculation happening, saw him counting angles, planning shots. Then he stepped out, weapon raised. Nobody move. The men's heads snapped up. For a frozen second, everything was still. Then chaos. One man lunged for his gun. Dominic fired first, the shot incredibly loud in the enclosed space. The man went down, the others scattering, chairs crashing. Another man got his weapon up, fired wild. The bullet sparked off metal somewhere above Elena's head. She ducked, heart exploding, finger tight on her own trigger. Dominic moved like water, smooth and fast, putting 2 more shots into the second man. He dropped. The third man had taken cover behind a pallet, firing blind. Bullets chewed through cardboard and wood, filling the air with debris. Dominic pressed against a container, breathing hard, blood seeping through his bandage. The fourth man had disappeared. Elena scanned the shadows, trying to see movement, trying to find him. There, a flicker, maybe 20 feet to her left. He was flanking, trying to get behind Dominic. She didn't think, just raised her gun, aimed the way Dominic had taught her, and fired. The shot went high, hitting the container behind the man. But it made him turn, made him focus on her instead of Dominic. He brought his gun around, and Elena saw his face clearly for the first time. Young, maybe her age, eyes wide with fear and rage. She fired again. This time she didn't miss. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder, gun falling from his grip. He stared at her with something like disbelief, then collapsed. The third man chose that moment to run, breaking from cover, heading for the exit. Dominic let him go, already moving to check the bodies. 2 dead, 1 dying, 1 wounded. Elena couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, staring at the man she'd shot, watching blood spread across the concrete. Elena, Dominic's voice sharp. We have to go. Now. She looked at him, saw blood on his shirt, fresh blood mixing with old. His shoulder had reopened. You're bleeding. I'll survive. Move. He grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the exit. Behind them, the wounded man was moaning, begging in Italian for help that wouldn't come. The sound followed them out into the night, into the car, into Elena's nightmares for years after. Dominic drove fast, taking turns that threw Elena against the door. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop seeing that man's face, the shock in his eyes when her bullet hit. Pull over, she managed. Not yet. Pull over now. He did, barely getting the car stopped before Elena threw open the door and vomited into the weeds. Her whole body shook, adrenaline and shock warring inside her chest. She heaved until there was nothing left, then slumped against the seat, gasping. Dominic said nothing, just waited while she collected herself, while the shaking gradually subsided. I shot him, Elena whispered. You saved my life. I shot him. Yes, you did, and you'll carry that. But you're alive, and so am I, because you did what needed to be done. He reached over, took her hand. His palm was warm, steady. That's the cost, Elena. That's what this life takes from you. Little pieces until there's nothing clean left. I don't want to be like this. Then we end it. Tonight was the opening shot. Now they know we're coming. Elena looked at him, really looked. His face was pale, pain etched around his eyes, blood soaking through his shirt. He was falling apart, held together by will and medication and sheer stubborn refusal to die. We need to get you to a doctor, she said. No doctors. Back to the house. I'll manage. Dominic, I've survived worse. She didn't believe him, but arguing was pointless. They drove back in silence, Elena's mind replaying the shooting over and over, seeing variations where she missed, where the man killed Dominic, where everything went wrong. But they were alive. That had to count for something. Back at the house, Elena cleaned Dominic's wound again. The stitches had torn, fresh blood mixing with old. She did her best to close it, but her hand shook too much to be effective. It's fine, Dominic said, reading her expression. I've had worse. You keep saying that. Because it's true. She finished bandaging him, stepped back. He caught her wrist before she could retreat completely. Thank you, he said quietly. For tonight. For having my back. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You chose to stay. Elena pulled her hand free, wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know what I am anymore. I killed someone tonight. That man, he was someone's son, maybe someone's brother, and her voice cracked. I just shot him. He would have killed me, would have killed you. This isn't a fair world, Elena. It's us or them, and I need you to understand that. I do understand. That's what scares me. I understand it, and I can live with it. Dominic stood, moved closer. His hand came up, touched her face gently. You're stronger than you know. Or more broken. Maybe both. They stood like that, inches apart, the weight of violence and survival pressing down on them. Elena felt something shift again, that same charge from earlier, stronger now, sharpened by fear and blood and the realization that they might not survive the next few days. We should sleep, Dominic said, but he didn't move. Yeah. Neither of them moved. Elena. Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Why not? Because if you say it, if we acknowledge this, then it becomes real, and I can't handle that right now. Handle what? Caring about you, about whether you live or die, about what happens when this is over. Her voice was raw, stripped bare. I can't afford to care about you, Dominic. Too late. What? It's too late. You already care. I can see it. Elena wanted to deny it, wanted to build walls, wanted to go back to the safety of anger and distance. But standing there, looking at his face in the candlelight, she couldn't lie anymore. Yes, she whispered. I care. Damn you, I care. I care too. That's worse. You caring makes this impossible. Why? Because you're going to die fighting the Calabrians, and I'm going to watch it happen, and I'll have to live with that forever. Dominic's hand slid to the back of her neck, pulled her closer. Then we make sure I don't die. You can't guarantee that. No, but I can try. Elena closed the last few inches between them, pressed her forehead to his. They stood like that, breathing the same air, neither quite brave enough to close the final distance. This is insane, Elena said. I know. We barely know each other. I know. If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. I know that too. Elena pulled back slightly, met his eyes, saw her own fear reflected there, mixed with something that looked almost like hope. Then we better make it count, she said, and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't romantic or soft or any of the things first kisses were supposed to be. It was desperate and raw, tasting of blood and gunpowder and fear. Dominic's hands tangled in her hair, pulled her closer. Elena's fingers dug into his shoulders, careful of the wound but needing the contact, needing proof that they were both still alive. They broke apart, gasping. Your shoulder, Elena started. I don't care. He kissed her again, deeper this time, backing her toward the bedroom. They stumbled through the door, hands fumbling with clothes, movements urgent and clumsy. Elena's shirt came off, then his, revealing the stark white bandage against his skin. We shouldn't, Elena breathed against his mouth. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're bleeding again. Elena. He caught her face in both hands, made her look at him. If I'm going to die in the next few days, I want this. I want you. Please. The raw honesty of it broke something inside her. She nodded, unable to speak, and let him pull her down onto the bed. What followed was messy and imperfect, and entirely human. They were both damaged, both carrying wounds that went deeper than skin. Dominic moved carefully, grimacing when he put weight on his shoulder. Elena cried at one point, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion and the sheer insanity of finding comfort in the arms of a man whose family had destroyed hers. But it was real. More real than anything Elena had felt in years. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Dominic's breathing rough and uneven. Elena pressed her ear to his chest, counted his heartbeats, tried not to think about how fragile this moment was. "I'm sorry," Dominic said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For your mother, for dragging you into this, for being selfish enough to want you when I have nothing to offer. Stop apologizing. I've ruined your life." "My life was already ruined. You just gave me a different kind of ruin." Elena traced patterns on his chest, careful of the bandage. "Besides, I chose this. I chose to stay, chose to help, chose this. You don't get to take that away by claiming it's all your fault. You're 20 years old. You should be in university, living a normal life. Normal died when I was 7. Stop trying to give me something I never had." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "What do you want? If you could have anything?" Elena thought about it. A year ago, the answer would have been simple: safety, stability, a life without fear. Now, lying in the arms of a man who was equal parts salvation and damnation, she didn't know anymore. "I want the truth," she said finally. "About my mother, about the fire, about everything that happened. I want to know the whole story, not just the pieces you've given me." "Elena, you asked what I want. That's it. The truth." Dominic's arms tightened around her. "All right, but not tonight. Tonight we just exist. Tomorrow I'll tell you everything. Promise?" "I promise." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, pretending for a few hours that the world outside didn't exist. Elena woke to gray dawn and cold sheets. Dominic was gone. She sat up, heart racing, looking around the empty room. His clothes were gone too, and the guns they'd brought back from the warehouse. No. Elena threw on clothes, ran to the kitchen. Empty. The living room. Nothing. She checked every room in the house, finding them all vacant, before spotting a piece of paper on the kitchen table. The handwriting was neat, controlled, devastating. "Elena, forgive me. Last night I made a promise I can't keep. The truth would only hurt you more, and you've been hurt enough. I've gone to finish this. The Calabrians, the police, all of it. By the time you read this, it will be over one way or another. Don't follow. Don't try to find me. If I survive, I'll come back. If I don't, you're free. The house is yours. The money in the accounts is yours. Everything. Teresa knows how to access it. You were right that I was protecting you out of guilt. But what happened last night had nothing to do with guilt. That was real. Maybe the only real thing I've had in 20 years. Thank you for seeing me as human, even when I didn't deserve it." Dominic Elena read it 3 times, hands shaking, rage building with each pass. The bastard had left, had taken her choice away, made decisions for her like she was a child who couldn't handle the truth. She crumpled the note, threw it across the room, then grabbed her jacket and keys and ran for the car. She didn't know where he'd gone, but she could guess. The Calabrians had a main compound in the city, heavily guarded, effectively a fortress. If Dominic was ending this, that's where he'd go, straight into hell, alone, on a suicide mission that he'd framed as protection. Elena drove too fast, taking curves that made the tires scream. The sun rose as she drove, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Teresa. "Where is he?" Elena demanded, answering. "On his way to the Rossi compound." "Elena, you need to stay away." "Like hell I do." "He's trying to protect you." "By getting himself killed?" "No. Tell me how to get there." Teresa was quiet for a long moment. Then she gave directions, her voice tight with fear. "If you go there, you'll likely die too." "Then I die, but I'm not letting him do this alone." She ended the call, followed Teresa's directions into the city. Morning traffic was building, people heading to work, to school, to normal lives that felt like they belonged to a different universe. The Rossi compound was in the old industrial district, surrounded by high walls and guards. Elena parked 3 blocks away, checked the gun Dominic had left behind. He'd taken most, but not all. 1 pistol, mostly full magazine. She'd have to make it count. Elena approached on foot, staying to the shadows. using everything Dominic had taught her. The main gate was heavily guarded, but there was a service entrance on the east side, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. She got within 50 feet before someone spotted her. "Hey, stop!" Elena ran, bullets chewing up pavement behind her. She made it to the wall, found a drainage pipe, started climbing. Her arms screamed, but she kept going, hauled herself over the top, dropped into the compound. More shouts, more gunfire. She ran toward the main building, saw bodies already on the ground. Dominic had been here, was maybe still here. The front door hung open, splintered from forced entry. Elena slipped inside, gun raised, every sense screaming. The interior was chaos. Bodies in the hallway, blood on the walls, the sharp smell of cordite thick in the air. Elena followed the trail of destruction deeper into the building, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Voices ahead. Angry, frightened, she crept closer, peered around a corner. Dominic stood in a large office, surrounded. 5 men, all armed, all pointing weapons at him. He looked terrible, his shirt soaked with blood, face pale, gun steady despite everything. "You're done, Falcone," one of them said. Elena recognized him from photos. Antonio Rossi, the Calabrian boss. "You've killed 20 of my men, destroyed my operations, and for what? A girl? She was never yours to take. Everything's mine to take. That's how this works." Rossi smiled, cold and cruel. "I'm going to enjoy making her scream, going to make it last days, and you'll die knowing you failed to save her." Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger. "You'll never touch her. I already have men looking. She'll be found within the hour." That's when Elena stepped into the room, gun raised. "No, you won't." Every head swiveled toward her. Dominic's expression went from shock to fury to resignation in the space of a heartbeat. "Elena, get out of here," he said, voice deadly calm. "No, this isn't your fight." "Yes, it is. It's been my fight since the day your family killed my mother," Rossi laughed. "Well, this is convenient. Now I don't have to hunt you down." He gestured to his men. "Take her." 2 moved toward Elena. She shot the first without hesitation, watched him drop. The second dove for cover, firing wild. Elena ducked behind a filing cabinet as the room erupted into chaos. Dominic used the distraction, put 2 bullets into Rossi before the others could react. The boss went down hard, clutching his chest, eyes wide with disbelief. The remaining 3 men scattered, taking positions, laying down suppressing fire. Elena stayed behind the cabinet, breathing hard, trying to think. She had maybe 4 shots left. Not enough. "Elena!" Dominic's voice strained. "There's a door behind you. 10 feet. Get to it." She looked back, saw it, tried to move, but bullets forced her back down. Dominic stood, drawing fire, giving her an opening. Elena ran for the door, grabbed the handle, twisted, locked, more gunfire. She turned, saw Dominic going down, blood blooming on his thigh. He hit the ground hard, lost his grip on his gun. The nearest man stepped out, weapon aimed at Dominic's head. Elena didn't think, just aimed and fired. The man collapsed. She kept firing, kept moving forward, emptying her magazine into anyone who still held a weapon. The slide locked back on empty, and suddenly the room was quiet except for the ringing in her ears. She stood frozen, staring at the bodies, at the blood, at Dominic trying to push himself up with arms that shook. "Elena," he gasped, "help me up." She ran to him, grabbed his arm, hauled him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, breathing hard. "You weren't supposed to come," he said. "I don't follow orders well. You said that yourself." "Stubborn idiot who tried to die alone. Yes, I know." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "We need to go," Elena said. "Now." They stumbled together toward the exit, leaving behind the carnage, the blood, the empire that was finally crumbling. Dominic could barely walk, his leg dragging, leaving a trail of blood. They made it to the car somehow. Elena got him in the passenger seat, slid behind the wheel, drove. Police cars passed them going the opposite direction, lights and sirens blaring. No one stopped them. 2 more people in a city full of people, anonymous in their survival. "Where are we going?" Dominic asked, his voice weak. "I don't know. Somewhere they can't find us." "Doesn't exist." "Then we make it exist." She drove until the city was behind them, until the sirens faded, until all that remained was road and sky and the sound of Dominic breathing beside her. He'd passed out somewhere around the outskirts, blood loss finally claiming him. Elena kept checking his pulse at every stoplight, terrified she'd find nothing. But he was alive. They both were. And for now, that had to be enough. Elena found a clinic 2 hours outside the city, the kind that didn't ask questions if you paid cash. The doctor was old, his hands steady despite the tremor in his voice when he saw how much blood Dominic had lost. "He needs a hospital," the doctor said, cutting away Dominic's pants to expose the leg wound. "Can't do a hospital." "Then he might die here." "He might die anywhere. Do what you can." The doctor looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and got to work. Elena sat in the corner, watching him extract the bullet, clean the wound, stitch what could be stitched. Dominic didn't wake through any of it, his face gray and slack. "The shoulder wound reopened," the doctor said, moving to examine it. "This is infected. How long has he had this?" 5 days. "He should have been on IV antibiotics days ago." The doctor shook his head. "I'll do what I can, but infection this deep. There are no guarantees." Elena paid him everything in her wallet, watched him pack the wounds, start an IV line with fluids and antibiotics. Then she helped load Dominic into the back seat and drove until she found a motel that looked desperate enough not to care about guests who bled on the sheets. The room smelled like mildew and old smoke. Elena laid Dominic on the bed, checked his pulse, thready but present, and collapsed in the chair by the window. She'd killed 4 men today. Maybe 5, she'd lost count in the chaos. Her hands should be shaking, she should be falling apart. Instead, she felt nothing, just a hollow exhaustion that went bone deep. The television was on, volume low, playing news she couldn't process. Her phone buzzed. Teresa calling for the 5th time. Elena ignored it, stared at the ceiling, and tried to figure out what came next. They couldn't go back. The villa was crime scene, probably swarming with police. The grandfather's house was compromised. Every safe house Dominic had was now a trap. They had each other and a dying car and maybe $2,000 in cash. It wasn't enough, but it would have to be. Dominic woke sometime after midnight, disoriented and in pain. "Where?" He tried to sit up, gasped, fell back. "Motel. We're safe. Lie still." The compound? Burned. Rossi's dead. So are most of his men. Elena moved to the bed, checked his IV, still dripping. Good. The news is calling it a gang massacre. Police found 23 bodies. "You should have left me." "We've had this conversation. I'm not having it again." Dominic closed his eyes. "How bad?" "You lost a lot of blood. The doctor said the infection might kill you before the wounds do, so there's that to look forward to." Always the optimist. I learned from the best. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, then vanished. "I'm sorry for leaving you at the house, for trying to die alone like an idiot. Yes, you should be sorry." Elena sat on the edge of the bed. "You wrote me a letter, a goodbye letter, like I was some character in your tragic ending. I wanted you safe. I wanted you alive. Guess we're both disappointed." He opened his eyes, looked at her, really looked. "You came anyway." "Of course I did." "Why?" Elena thought about lying, about deflecting, then decided he deserved the truth, even if it was messy and complicated and made everything harder. "Because somewhere between you forcing me into marriage and teaching me to shoot, I stopped seeing you as the man who destroyed my life and started seeing you as just a man. A broken, damaged man trying to fix things he can never fix. And I couldn't let you die without telling you that." Dominic's hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "That's a terrible reason." "I know. We have no future, Elena. Even if I survive this, we're fugitives now. The police, the Calabrians who are left, everyone will be hunting us. Then we run. For how long? As long as it takes. That's not a life. It's more than we had yesterday." Elena threaded her fingers through his. "Stop trying to make me walk away. I'm here. I'm staying. Get used to it." He studied her face in the dim light from the TV. "You've gotten harder. You needed me to be. I needed you to be safe." "Same thing, apparently." Dominic closed his eyes again, but he didn't let go of her hand. Elena sat there, feeling his pulse against her palm, counting the seconds between breaths. He fell asleep, still holding on. 3 days crawled by in that motel room. Elena changed Dominic's bandages, monitored his fever, kept him hydrated. The infection fought the antibiotics, climbing and falling in waves that left him delirious and shaking. On the second night, he woke screaming about the fire, about bodies burning, about his brother's face as Dominic pulled the trigger. Elena held him through it, whispered things she didn't remember later, just sounds meant to anchor him to reality. "I killed him," Dominic gasped, clutching her arms. Put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. "He was my brother and I killed him." "I know." He begged, said it was an accident, said the fire wasn't supposed to spread that far, and I killed him anyway. Because he murdered my mother. Because he was weak. Because he made me weak by association. Dominic's eyes were unfocused, seeing something Elena couldn't. I told myself it was justice, but it was just revenge. Does it matter? Yes. Justice has rules. Revenge is just anger with a body count. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just held him until the fever pulled him under again, back into nightmares she couldn't follow. By the fourth day, the fever finally broke. Dominic woke clear-eyed, the infection retreating under the sustained assault of antibiotics. He was weak, shaky, but alive. "We need to move," he said, watching Elena count their remaining cash. "Can't stay here much longer." "Where would we go?" "North, across the border. I have contacts in Switzerland, people who owe me favors." "And they won't turn us in?" "They might, but it's better odds than staying here." Elena finished counting. 1,800 left. Not enough for bribes, not enough for new identities, barely enough for gas and food. "We're going to need money," she said. "There's an account. Offshore, under a false name. Teresa has the access codes." "You trust her?" "With my life. Which is apparently worth less every day." He pushed himself up, wincing. "Call her, get the information. We'll need it to disappear properly." Elena made the call from a payphone outside, Teresa answering on the first ring. "Elena, thank goodness, we've been so worried." "We're alive, barely. Dominic needs the access codes for the offshore account." Teresa rattled off numbers and passwords that Elena scratched onto a napkin. Then quieter. "The police came to the villa, took everything. They're saying Dominic is responsible for 30 murders, maybe more." "He didn't kill 30 people." "Does it matter? They're building a case. And the Calabrians, what's left of them, they've put a price on both your heads. 2 million for information leading to your capture." Elena's hand tightened on the receiver. "So we can't come back?" "Not unless you want to die. Or worse." Teresa paused. "There's something else. Papers came yesterday. Legal documents. Dominic had his lawyer file them weeks ago before the attack." "What kind of papers?" "Divorce papers. Already signed by him. Notarized. All you need to do is sign and file them. You'd be free, legally. No longer his wife, no longer tied to any of this." The world tilted slightly. Elena leaned against the phone booth, processing. "He filed for divorce. He wanted you to have an out, a way to walk away clean if anything happened to him. When were you going to tell me?" "He asked me not to, said you'd refuse." "He was right." Elena crumpled the napkin with the account codes. "I'm not signing them." "Elena, I'm not signing them, Teresa. Tell the lawyer to destroy them. You're choosing to stay legally bound to a wanted criminal? I'm choosing to stay with the man I love. There's a difference." The words escaped before Elena could stop them, and hearing them out loud made them more real, more terrifying. She loved him. Somewhere in the chaos and violence and fear, she'd fallen in love with Dominic Falcone. Teresa was quiet for a long moment, then, gently, "He loves you too. He'd never say it, but I know. I've worked for that man for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. That doesn't change what we're facing." "No, but maybe it makes it worth facing." They said goodbye. Elena walked back to the room, found Dominic trying to stand on his own, using the wall for support. "What are you doing?" "Practicing. I need to be able to walk if we're crossing borders." "You were shot 4 days ago." "I'm aware." He took another step, legs shaking but holding. "Did Teresa have the codes?" "Yes." Elena set down the napkin. "She also said you filed for divorce." Dominic's expression closed off. "Yes." "When?" 3 weeks ago, before the attack, before everything. Why? To give you an out. If I died, you'd be free. No legal connection, no inheritance complications, just clean separation. Elena crossed her arms. And you didn't think to discuss this with me? It wasn't up for discussion. I'm your wife. It's absolutely up for discussion. On paper, maybe. But this marriage was never real. Don't. Elena's voice cut like glass. Don't you dare stand there and tell me this isn't real. Not after everything. Not after what happened at the grandfather's house. Dominic looked away. That was a mistake. Bullshit. Elena, you're scared. I get it. You're scared of caring about someone, scared of losing someone else. So you're trying to push me away before the universe can take me from you. But I'm not going anywhere. So you can file all the divorce papers you want. I'm not signing them. You should, for your own good. Stop deciding what's good for me. Someone has to. You're 20 years old, you have your whole life. I'm 20 years old, and I've killed 5 men, and I'm in love with a mafia boss twice my age who's too stubborn to admit he loves me back. The words tumbled out, raw and messy. So stop trying to protect me from choices I've already made. Dominic stared at her, something like pain crossing his face. You don't love me. Yes, I do. You love the idea of me. The man who saved you, who protected you. That's not real. You're right, it's not, because that man doesn't exist. The real you is broken and violent and carries so much guilt you can barely breathe under it. And I love that man, the real one, not the idea. His hands clenched into fists. You shouldn't. Too bad. They stood in the cheap motel room, staring at each other across a distance that felt both infinite and non-existent. Elena waited for him to say something, to push back, to keep insisting this was wrong. Instead, he closed the gap between them, pulled her into his arms, and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. I don't deserve you, he said against her hair. Probably not. I'm going to disappoint you. Already have several times. I'm still going to die young, probably violently. Then we better make the time count. He pulled back enough to look at her. You're insane. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. Elena reached up, touched his face. Are you going to tell me you love me, or do I have to keep fishing for it? I love you. The words came out rough, like they hurt. I've loved you since you stood in my office and demanded answers, since you refused to be afraid of me, since you came back for me at the compound when any sane person would have run. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I love you, and it terrifies me because everyone I've ever loved has died. Then I guess I better stay alive. Elena. She kissed him, stopping the argument before it could start. They'd have time later for fear and logistics and planning. Right now, in this moment, they were alive, together. And that was enough. They left the motel 2 days later, Dominic moving stiffly but under his own power. Elena drove, following a route he'd mapped out that avoided major highways and cities. They were heading north, toward the mountains, toward the border crossings that didn't ask too many questions if you paid enough. The money from the offshore account helped. Elena accessed it at an internet cafe, moved funds through 3 different accounts to obscure the trail, withdrew cash in small amounts from different ATMs. Dominic taught her the tricks. Never more than 500 at a time, never the same machine twice, always pay cash, never use credit cards. They became ghosts, sleeping in different motels every night, eating at diners that didn't have security cameras, avoiding anywhere that might recognize them from news reports. And the news was everywhere. The massacre at the Rossi compound had made international headlines, 31 dead in total, including Antonio Rossi himself. The police had connected it to the earlier attack on Dominic's villa, recalling it the bloodiest gang war in decades. Dominic's face was plastered across every channel. Elena's too, once they identified her from security footage at the compound. Grainy images of her with a gun, of her running toward the building. They were calling her his accomplice, his lover, his partner in violence. They weren't wrong. We should split up, Dominic said one night, lying in another anonymous bed, watching coverage of the manhunt. You'd be safer without me. No. Elena, we're not having this conversation again. I'm not leaving you. He was quiet for a long time, then, thank you. For what? For being too stubborn to give up on me. Elena turned to face him in the dark. Someone has to be. You've given up on yourself. Can you blame me? Yes, you're still alive. That counts for something. Does it? It does to me. They crossed the border 3 weeks after the compound. A small checkpoint in the mountains, manned by a single guard who looked at their false passports for all of 5 seconds before waving them through. Either he didn't care, or the bribe Dominic had sent ahead had worked. Switzerland welcomed them with cold air and indifferent mountains. They drove to a small town near Lucerne, checked into a hotel under names that belonged to people who didn't exist. Now what? Elena asked, staring out at the lake. Now we disappear, completely. New names, new histories, new lives. And do what? Whatever we want, within reason. Can we do that? Just stop? Dominic came to stand beside her. We can try. But trying, it turned out, was harder than either of them expected. The first month was the worst. Every knock on the door made Elena jump. Every stranger who looked too long made her hand drift toward the gun she kept in her jacket. Sleep was fractured, full of nightmares about the compound, about blood, about watching Dominic die over and over. Dominic wasn't better. He woke gasping some nights, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had entered. Other nights he couldn't sleep at all, just paced their small apartment like a caged animal. This is impossible, Elena said one night, finding him standing at the window at 3 a.m. We can't live like this. I know. So what do we do? I don't know. They stood together in the dark, two people trying to figure out how to live with the choices they'd made. The answer came from an unexpected source. Elena was at a cafe, reading a local newspaper when she saw the article. A shelter for domestic violence survivors was closing due to lack of funding. The director was quoted, saying she hated turning away women who needed help. Elena stared at the article for a long time, then took it home and showed Dominic. What am I looking at? He asked. A purpose. I don't understand. You spent 25 years building an empire on violence. What if you spent the next 25 tearing that down, building something that actually helps people? Dominic looked at her like she was speaking another language. You want me to fund a women's shelter. I want us to fund it, and not just one, as many as we can. Use the money you made from crime to undo some of the damage. That's insane? Yes, but so is everything else we've done. Elena sat beside him. We can't go back, can't undo the past, but maybe we can build something different going forward, something that means the last 25 years weren't completely pointless. He studied her face, and she saw him turning it over, looking for the trap, the flaw in the logic. Finally, he nodded. All right, let's try. They started small. An anonymous donation to keep the shelter open, then another to a food bank, a third to a legal aid organization. Elena handled the money, moved it carefully, made sure nothing could be traced back to them. Dominic did the research, found organizations that needed help, vetted them to make sure the money would be used properly. He threw himself into it with the same intensity he'd once applied to violence, and Elena watched something shift in him. The guilt didn't disappear. It never would. But it found an outlet that wasn't self-destruction. Months passed. A year. They were still looking over their shoulders, still jumped at unexpected sounds. But slowly, carefully, they built something like a life. Elena learned French, then German, got a job at a bookstore that didn't ask too many questions. Dominic worked remotely for a consulting firm using his business knowledge to help legitimate companies, hiding behind layers of anonymous accounts and VPNs. They moved twice more, chasing safety, never quite finding it. But they found each other, over and over, in the quiet moments between fear. Do you regret it? Elena asked one night, 2 years after crossing the border. They were in a different apartment, a different city, but the question was the same. Regret what? All of it, the violence, the choices, the way everything ended. Dominic thought about it. I regret the violence. I regret the people I hurt, the lives I destroyed. I regret that it took me 50 years to realize there was a better way. He looked at her. But I don't regret you. I don't regret choosing to protect you, choosing to leave that life, choosing to build this one. That I'd do again. Even knowing how hard it would be? Especially knowing that. Elena leaned against him, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. They'd survived. Against all odds, against all logic, they'd survived. But survival, Elena was learning, was just the beginning. The real work was figuring out how to live. Then, 3 years after they'd crossed the border, everything changed again. Elena was walking home from work when she saw him. Just a glimpse, a man in a car parked across the street, watching her building. She wouldn't have noticed except for the way he held himself, alert, professional, too interested. She kept walking, circled the block, came back from a different direction. The car was still there. Different angle, same man. Her heart kicked into overdrive. She called Dominic from a payphone. "We've been found," she said without preamble. "Are you sure?" "There's a man watching our building, professional. Could be police, could be something else." Silence on the other end. Then, "Don't go home. Meet me at the station. We're leaving, now." Elena spent the next hour gathering everything she could carry, staying off main streets, checking constantly for followers. She made it to the train station, found Dominic waiting with 2 bags and tickets to somewhere she couldn't pronounce. They boarded without speaking, found their seats, and watched the city disappear behind them. "How did they find us?" Elena asked once they were moving. "I don't know. We were careful." "Not careful enough." "Apparently not." Elena stared out the window, feeling the fragile peace they'd built crumbling. "We can't keep running forever." "I know." "So what do we do?" Dominic took her hand. "We keep going, as long as we can. And when we can't anymore," he paused, "we make a choice." "What kind of choice?" "Whether to keep running or to stop. To face whatever's coming." Elena looked at their joined hands, at the ring she still wore despite everything. "And which would you choose?" "I don't know. Ask me when we get there." But Elena could see the answer in his eyes. Dominic was tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of looking over his shoulder. He'd been ready to die 3 years ago at the compound. Some part of him was still ready, and that terrified her more than any pursuer ever could, because Elena had tasted life, real life, messy and imperfect, but hers. And she wasn't ready to give it up. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Which meant one of them would have to compromise, would have to choose the other's path. And Elena didn't know if their love was strong enough to survive that choice. The train carried them to a town near the Austrian border, small enough that strangers went unnoticed, large enough to disappear into. They rented a room above a bakery, paid 3 months in advance with cash, and waited to see if they'd been followed. Days passed. No one came. But the damage was done. The illusion of safety had shattered, and neither of them could pretend anymore that they'd truly escaped. "We need to talk about this," Elena said one morning, watching Dominic stare out the window like he was waiting for death to arrive. "Talk about what?" "About the fact that you're giving up." He didn't turn around. "I'm being realistic." "You're being defeatist. There's a difference. They found us once. They'll find us again. It's only a matter of time. Then we keep moving. We've done it before." "For how long, Elena? 5 years? 10? Until we're too old to run anymore?" He finally looked at her. "This isn't living. This is just postponing the inevitable." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. "So what are you saying? We should just give up, turn ourselves in?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to stop running and face what's coming." "You mean die? You want to die. I want to stop dragging you through this hell." Elena stood, crossed to him, made him look at her. "I chose this. I chose you. Stop trying to make that decision for me. You were 20 years old. You didn't know what you were choosing. I'm 23 now, old enough to know exactly what I chose. And I'd choose it again." Dominic's hand came up, cupped her face. "You deserve better than this." "Maybe. But this is what I have, what we have. And I'm not ready to give up on it. Even if it means running forever? Even then." They stood like that, foreheads pressed together, both trying to find a way forward that didn't require one of them to sacrifice everything. The answer came 2 weeks later from Teresa. Elena had maintained sporadic contact with her over the years, careful messages sent through encrypted channels. This message was different, urgent, marked priority. "Police have closed the investigation. Dominic is still wanted, but they've stopped actively searching. The Calabrian family is destroyed, scattered, most dead, the rest in prison or hiding. You're ghost to them now. No one is looking anymore. But there's something else. A prosecutor reached out. He's building a case against the old regime, wants testimony about the violence, the corruption. He's offering immunity in exchange for cooperation. Said Dominic's testimony could bring down the last of the network, help victims get justice. It's a choice. Come back and face the past, or stay hidden forever. I can't tell you what to do, but I thought you should know the option exists. Elena read the message 3 times, then showed it to Dominic. He stared at the screen for a long time. Immunity? And a chance to actually fix things, to testify, to help put away the people who are still operating. Or a trap. Maybe, but Teresa wouldn't send this if she thought it would get us killed. Dominic handed back the phone. What do you want to do? I want to stop running. I want to go home, whatever that means. I want... Elena stopped, trying to find the words. I want us to have a future that isn't built on fear. Testifying won't erase what we did. No, but it might mean something, might help someone. He was quiet for a long time, staring at nothing. Elena waited, letting him process, knowing this decision couldn't be rushed. If we do this, Dominic said finally, if we go back, it won't be clean. Immunity means admitting to crimes, going public with everything. Our names, our faces, what we did, it'll all be out there. We won't get to hide anymore. I know. People will hate us, call us murderers, criminals. They wouldn't be wrong. And you're okay with that? Elena thought about it, really thought. About the 5 men she'd killed, about the lives destroyed by Dominic's empire, about the weight of guilt they'd carry forever. Going public meant owning all of it, facing judgment from a world that wouldn't understand the impossible choices they'd faced. But it also meant the chance to help dismantle what remained of the system, to give testimony that could protect others from the violence they'd lived through, to turn their damage into something useful. Yes, she said. I'm okay with it, because hiding hasn't made the guilt go away. Maybe facing it will. Dominic pulled her close, held on tight. You're braver than I am. No, I'm just tired of being afraid. They contacted Teresa the next day, began the careful process of negotiating their return. The prosecutor was cautious but interested. Dominic's testimony could expose decades of corruption, dismantle networks that still operated in the shadows. In exchange, immunity from prosecution, witness protection if needed. It took 3 months to arrange. 3 months of lawyers and secret meetings, and Elena watching Dominic slowly accept that he might actually survive this, that he might get to live long enough to atone for some of what he'd done. They returned to Italy on a gray morning in October, 4 years after they'd fled. The prosecutor met them at a private location, surrounded by guards and lawyers, everything documented and official. You understand what you're agreeing to, the prosecutor said, laying out papers. Full disclosure of your activities, names, and dates and locations. Everything you know about the organization's operations. In exchange, immunity for both of you on all charges except those directly related to the Rossi compound. The compound charges aren't covered? Elena asked. Those are murder charges. I can't make those disappear entirely. But I can argue self-defense, extreme circumstances. Given the attack on your home, the threat to your life. He shrugged. It's not guaranteed, but I think we can make it work. Dominic looked at Elena. Last chance to walk away. Stop asking me that. He signed. So did she. And with those signatures, their hidden life ended. They were no longer ghosts. They were witnesses, evidence, testimony that would bring down what remained of the empire Dominic had built. The trial took 8 months. Dominic testified for 6 days straight, laying out the entire structure of his organization, naming names, providing evidence that had been hidden for decades. Elena testified for 2, describing the attack, the self-defense, the impossible choice between fighting and dying. The media was brutal. Photos of them leaving the courthouse appeared everywhere, accompanied by headlines calling them monsters, criminals, killers who'd gotten away with murder. Protesters showed up, families of victims demanding justice. The prosecutor's office needed extra security just to get them in and out safely. But something else happened too. Letters started arriving. Not hate mail, though there was plenty of that. These were different. From women who'd escaped domestic violence, from families who'd lost loved ones to gang violence, from people who said Dominic's testimony had helped put away the men who'd hurt them. Thank you for speaking up, one letter said. My daughter was killed by one of these men. Because of your testimony, he's finally facing justice. I know you're not innocent, but you helped, and that matters." Elena read that letter 3 times, then showed it to Dominic. He stared at it for a long time without speaking. "Does it matter?" he asked quietly. "Helping now, after everything?" "I don't know, but it's something." The verdict came down on a cold January morning. The judge reviewed the evidence, the testimony, the circumstances, then delivered the ruling. Dominic was found guilty of racketeering, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. The self-defense argument held for the compound, barely, but his past couldn't be ignored. The sentence was 15 years, reduced to 7 with good behavior and continued cooperation. Elena was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, sentenced to 3 years, eligible for parole in 18 months. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't death either. They were separated after the sentencing, sent to different facilities. Elena ended up in a minimum security prison 3 hours from the city, a place that looked more like a college campus than a jail. Dominic went somewhere harsher, a facility designed for organized crime figures who'd turned informant. Elena saw him once every 2 months, 30-minute visits in a room designed to prevent physical contact. They talked about nothing: books she was reading, programs he was teaching to other inmates, Teresa's updates about the foundation they'd started with the offshore money. They didn't talk about the future. There was no point when the present was measured in months and years still to serve. Elena used her time inside to finish her education, taking correspondence courses that led to a degree in social work. She read everything she could about trauma, about helping people rebuild after violence. She attended therapy, both mandatory and voluntary, working through the nightmares and guilt that still haunted her. And slowly, painfully, she began to forgive herself. Not for the killing, she'd never fully reconcile that, but for surviving. For choosing to live when death would have been easier. 18 months into her sentence, Elena was granted parole. She walked out of prison on a spring morning, breathing free air for the first time in what felt like forever. Teresa was waiting with a car. "He wanted me to give you this," Teresa said, handing over an envelope. Inside was a letter in Dominic's careful handwriting. "Elena, by the time you read this, you'll be free, really free, for the first time since we met. You've served your time, paid your debt. You have a chance now to build a life that isn't defined by what we did. I'm asking you not to wait for me. 5 more years is too long to put your life on hold. You're 26 years old. You should be living, not visiting a man in prison who cost you too much already. The foundation is yours. Teresa has all the access codes, all the legal paperwork. Use the money to do the work we talked about. Help people. Build something good from all that damage. If, when I get out, you still want me, I'll be there. But don't wait. Please. Live your life. I love you. I always will." Dominic Elena folded the letter carefully, hands shaking. Then she looked at Teresa. "He's an idiot if he thinks I'm not waiting." Teresa smiled. "I told him you'd say that. Where are we going?" "Wherever you want." Elena thought about it. Then, "Show me the foundation. Show me what we've built." Over the next 5 years, Elena poured everything into the work. The foundation grew from funding 1 shelter to funding 20, then 50. They expanded into legal aid, job training, addiction support. Every program was designed to help people escape the kind of violence that had defined Elena's life. She visited Dominic every month, those 30-minute conversations becoming the rhythm of her life. She watched him age in prison, gray spreading through his hair, new lines appearing around his eyes. But she also watched him change, saw the guilt that had weighed him down begin to ease, not disappear, but transform into something he could carry. "You're doing good work," he said during one visit 3 years into his sentence. "The foundation, the shelters. Your mother would be proud." "I hope so. I know so. She spent her life running from violence. You're spending yours fighting it." He paused. "That's better than anything I ever did." "You started it. The foundation was your idea. It was your conviction that made it real." Dominic leaned forward as much as the rules allowed. "Thank you. For waiting. For not giving up on me. Stop thanking me. I'm exactly where I want to be. Visiting your incarcerated husband? Building a life with the man I love. The incarceration is just logistics." He laughed, real and warm. It was the first time Elena had heard him laugh in years. Dominic was released on a Wednesday morning in late summer, 7 years after the verdict. Elena was waiting outside the gates, Teresa beside her, both holding their breath as he walked through processing and into sunlight. He looked smaller somehow, softer around the edges. Prison had worn him down, but it had also stripped away some of the hardness that had defined him. What remained was just a man, tired, damaged, but alive. Elena ran to him, and he caught her, held on like she was the only real thing in the world. "Hi," she said against his chest. "Hi." They stood like that for a long time, ignoring Teresa's camera, ignoring the other families reuniting around them, just existing in the moment together after so long apart. "What now?" Dominic asked finally. "Now we live. Really live. No more running, no more hiding, just us and whatever time we have left." "That sounds impossible." "Good thing we're used to impossible." They rebuilt slowly. Found an apartment in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, just space and light and safety. Dominic went to work for the foundation, using his business knowledge to expand their reach. Elena continued the direct work, meeting with survivors, designing programs, fighting for funding. People recognized them sometimes. Some were hostile, spitting words like murder and criminal. Others thanked them, said the foundation had saved their daughter, their sister, their life. Elena learned to accept both responses, understood she'd never be simply good or bad in anyone's eyes. She was both, always, and would carry that complexity forever. 3 years after Dominic's release, they were working late at the foundation office when Elena found something. "Look at this," she said, showing him an application. It was a request for funding from a youth center in the neighborhood where Elena had grown up. The director's name was familiar, Marco Vieri's daughter, Elena's cousin, someone she hadn't seen in over a decade. "Should we fund it?" Dominic asked. Elena thought about Marco, about the way he'd sold her to save himself, about the complicated mess of family and obligation that had started all of this. Her cousin wasn't responsible for her father's choices, and the youth center looked legitimate, designed to keep kids out of the kind of life that had destroyed so many. "Yes," Elena said. "Fund it, and I want to meet with her." The meeting happened 2 weeks later. Elena's cousin, Sophia, was younger than Elena remembered, nervous and clearly unsure what to expect. They sat in a cafe, awkward silence stretching between them. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," Sophia said finally, "after everything my father did." "Your father's choices aren't yours." "Still, I know he hurt you. I'm sorry for that." "Is he still alive?" "He died 2 years ago. Liver failure. He drank himself to death, basically." Sophia stared at her coffee. "I don't miss him. Is that terrible?" "No, it's honest." They talked for over an hour, building a fragile bridge across the wreckage of their shared history. Sophia told her about the youth center, about trying to give kids the chances she'd never had. Elena told her about the foundation, about the work they were doing. At the end, Sophia said, "I know what you did, what both of you did. I've read the articles, watched the trial, and I can't say you were right or wrong. I don't know enough about it, but I know you're trying to fix things now, and that matters to me." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, she didn't need that from Sophia, but acceptance. Recognition that she was more than just her worst moments. "Thank you," Elena said, "for seeing that. Thank you for funding the center, for not punishing me for my father's mistakes." They left as something close to friends, or at least people who might become friends given time. Elena walked back to the office, found Dominic reviewing grant applications, and told him about the meeting. "Does it feel like closure?" he asked. "No, but it feels like something, a step toward being okay with who I am." "And who are you?" Elena thought about the question, really considered it. She was the daughter of a murdered woman, the wife of a reformed crime boss, a killer who'd taken 5 lives in self-defense, a survivor who'd built something good from terrible materials, all of it simultaneously without contradiction. "I'm someone who's done terrible things and trying to do better things," she said finally. "That's all any of us can be." Dominic stood, came around the desk, pulled her close. "I love you." "I know. Even after everything, even knowing you could have had a normal life if you'd never met me? I've never wanted normal. I just wanted real. And this," she gestured between them, around them. "This is as real as it gets." They stayed like that, holding each other in the small office, surrounded by paperwork and hope. Two broken people who'd somehow managed to build something worth keeping. 5 years passed, then 10. The foundation grew, helped thousands of people escape violence, rebuild lives, find safety. Dominic and Elena worked side by side, their partnership becoming the foundation of everything they built. They never had children. The decision was mutual, unspoken. Both understood they'd damaged too much to risk passing that on. Instead, they poured that energy into the work, into helping other people's children survive what they'd survived. Dominic's health began failing in his mid-60s. The bullet wounds had left damage, and prison hadn't helped. He developed a persistent cough that turned into pneumonia, which turned into something worse. The doctor said emphysema, said scarred lungs, said he had maybe 2 years. He worked for another 18 months, refusing to slow down until Elena physically removed files from his hands. "You need to rest," she said. "I'll rest when I'm dead." "That's coming faster than you think." "I know, which is why I want to work while I can." They compromised. Half days at the office, the rest at home. Elena watched him deteriorate, watched breathing become labor, watched the man who'd survived bullets in prison and decades of violence be defeated by his own lungs. "I'm not afraid," Dominic said one night, oxygen mask beside the bed, speaking carefully between breaths. "Of dying. I'm afraid of leaving you alone." "I won't be alone. I have the work. I have Teresa. I have the people we've helped. But not me." "No, not you." He reached for her hand. "I'm sorry for leaving you to carry this alone." "You carried your guilt alone for 25 years. It's my turn to carry something." "That's not the same." "No, but it's fair." Dominic died on a rainy morning in November, Elena beside him, holding his hand as his breathing finally stopped. He was 67. She was 41. They'd had 16 years together, which wasn't enough, would never be enough, but was more than either of them had expected. The funeral was small. Teresa came, and Sophia, and a handful of people from the foundation. No family, because Dominic's family was long gone, scattered or dead, or wanting nothing to do with him. Just the people whose lives he'd touched in the end, not the beginning. Elena stood at the grave, watching them lower his casket, and thought about the impossible journey they'd taken, from enemies to strangers to lovers to partners, from violence to redemption to something that resembled peace. "You did it," she whispered. "You changed. You were better. That counts." The rain soaked through her coat, but she didn't move. Just stood there until everyone else had left, until she was alone with the man who'd saved her by damning himself. Elena spent the next year in a grief that had no name, no easy category. She missed him constantly, but she also felt relief that he was no longer suffering. She was angry he'd left, but grateful for the time they'd had. All of it existed simultaneously, contradicting and complementary. She threw herself into the work, expanding the foundation, adding programs, helping more people. It was what Dominic would have wanted. What she wanted too. On the anniversary of his death, Elena visited the grave. The headstone was simple, listing his name and dates. Nothing about what he'd been or done. Just that he'd existed, had lived, had mattered to someone. She placed flowers, cheap grocery store roses, because Dominic would have laughed at anything fancier, and sat on the wet grass beside the stone. "I'm okay," she said out loud, not caring who heard. "It's hard, but I'm okay. The foundation is thriving. We helped 200 women this year, gave them shelter and legal aid and job training. Sophia's youth center is expanding. Teresa finally retired, said she'd earned rest. And I'm learning how to be just Elena. Not your wife, not a survivor, just me." The rain started again, soft and cold. Elena pulled her coat tighter. "I don't forgive you for the violence, for the years before we met, for the people who died because of your choices. I can't. But I understand now that people are more than their worst moments, that you spent the last 20 years of your life trying to be better, and you succeeded. That matters." She stood, touched the headstone once. "Thank you. For seeing me when I was invisible, for protecting me when no one else would, for loving me even though you thought you didn't deserve to." Her voice cracked. "I loved you too. Still do. Always will." Then she walked away back toward the life she'd built, toward the work that gave it meaning. The rain washed away her tears, leaving her clean and cold and alone, but not empty. Because the thing about surviving violence, about living through impossible choices and building something good from ruins, it taught you that emptiness wasn't the opposite of fullness. It was just space waiting to be filled with whatever you chose next. Elena chose hope, chose work, chose helping others survive what she'd survived. And in choosing that, she honored both the mother who'd died running and the man who'd died trying to stand still. She carried their memories forward, not as weight, but as fuel, burning everything they'd lost to light the way for people who came after. 5 more years passed. Elena was 46. The foundation was serving 10 cities, and the work continued. She never remarried, never wanted to. Some loves weren't replaceable, and she'd used hers up on a man who'd been equal parts monster and saint. She stood one evening on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sun set over the city where she'd been married at 20, where she'd killed to survive, where she'd learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something better in spite of it. Her phone rang. Another crisis. Another woman needing help. Another chance to take the violence done to her and transform it into protection for someone else. Elena answered, because that's what she did now. That's what she'd always do. Turn pain into purpose, damage into action, impossible survival into the stubborn refusal to let violence win. "This is Elena," she said. "Tell me what you need." And as she listened, as she began planning how to help, she felt something that might have been peace. Not forgiveness. She still carried her crimes, would carry them forever. Not happiness. Too many people had died for that. But contentment. The knowledge that she was using her remaining years well, that the scared 20-year-old forced into marriage had become someone who fought back against the system that had tried to destroy her. The rain started again, soft against the windows. Elena watched it fall, remembering another rainy day, another ending, another beginning. And she chose to keep going, because that's what survivors did. They kept going, kept fighting, kept building something better from the ruins of what came before. Not because it was easy, not because it was fair, but because someone had to. And Elena had learned through blood and fear and impossible love that she was someone who could.